for giving us the opportunity to introduce EBRD transition report today. I especially want to thank TÜSİAD for hosting us and for all their support in organizing this meeting as our counterpart here. And I'd like to now invite Mr. Serkan Sevim, who is the TÜSİAD board member and leader of Digital Turkey Roundtable, for welcoming remarks.
Thank you for this opportunity. Actually, my speech will be in Turkish, so I welcome you all to this event and thank you for joining. So I continue my speech in Turkish. Değerli konuklar ve kıymetli basın mensupları, sizleri TÜSİAD Yönetim Kurulu adına sevgi ve saygıyla selamlıyorum. Bugün Avrupa İmar ve Kalkınma Bankası EBRD'nin sistem yükseltmesi, dijital faydayı sağlamak başlığıyla yayınlanan raporunu ele almak için bir aradayız. EBRD'nin çalışmaları bölgedeki önemli gelişmeleri, bölge vizyonunu ve Türkiye'nin potansiyelini ortaya koyması açısından çok kıymetli. Raporun hazırlanmasında katkısı olanlara teşekkür ediyorum. 1990'lı yıllarda internet ile başlayan süreçte başta ticaret olmak üzere birçok sektör yavaş bir hızla dönüşmeye başladı. Bugün geldiğimiz noktada ise dijitalleşmenin dokunduğu her sektörün öngörülerin ötesinde bir hızla dönüşümüne uğradığını görüyoruz. Sanayiden tarıma, sağlıktan eğitime, sektör fark etmeksizin iş modelleri bu dönüşüm perspektifiyle yeniden kurgulanıyor. Bununla beraber veriye ve bilgiye erişim artık coğrafi sınırları tanımıyor. Sektörlerin içsel yapılanmaları yanında değer zincirinin tamamında veri birikiminin sağladığı fırsatlar çeşitleniyor, yaratıcılık buradan güç alıyor. Ezber bozan inovasyon, küresel rekabet gücünü bu dinamiklerle şekillendiriyor. Bu durum gelişmiş ve gelişmekte olan ülkelerle beraber ekonominin tüm aktörlerini farklı düşünmeye, politikaları çok boyutlu kurgulamaya ve uygulamaları en hızlı şekilde gerçekleştirmeye zorluyor. Önümüzdeki 10 yılda Türkiye ve bölgemiz için önemli gelişmeler söz konusu olacak. Özellikle Avrupa'nın iki ana konu olarak yeşil mutabakat ve dijital konusunda yatırım yapacak olması bölge ve Türkiye adına önemli bir fırsat. Dijital hizmetler ve dijital pazarlar yasaları birliğin dijital stratejisi anlamında önemli adımlarından. Söz konusu düzenlemelerle online pazar yerleri ve sosyal medya sağlayıcılarının faaliyetlerine ilişkin ciddi yükümlülükler getirilmesi planlanıyor. Oluşmakta olan veri koruma kanunlarının ticari süreçleri ciddi bir şekilde etkileyeceğini düşünüyoruz. Bu anlamda AB ile entegrasyonu derinleştirerek bölgesel ekosistemin içinde bu gelişmeleri takip etmek ve hep beraber fayda üretmek zorundayız. Değerli konuklar, mobil teknolojiler, bulut altyapılar, yapay zeka çözümleri, blok zinciri ve nesnelerin interneti yatırımları her geçen gün daha kritik hale geliyor. Dijital teknoloji temelli sektörlerimizin, özellikle yazılımın ekonomi içindeki payı artıyor. Yazılım sektörü son 10 yılda internet, mobil telefonlar ve artan kurumsal bilgi teknolojileri yatırımlarının etkisiyle birçok dijital sektörün doğuşuna sebep oldu. 2019 yılında yazılım sektörünün ve etkileşim içinde olduğu dijital sektörlerin toplam büyüklüğü 2,5 trilyon dolar seviyesindeyken bu rakamın önümüzdeki 5 yılın sonunda 4 trilyon dolara çıkması bekleniyor. Ayrıca yapılan son araştırmalara göre dijitalin ana asfaltı olan yazılım sektörü katma değer anlamında %81'lik oranla 4. sırada yer alıyor. Yine incelenen 64 sektörden 61'ine direkt katkı sağlıyor. TÜSİAD olarak yazılım sektöründeki şirketlerimizin ihracat odaklı olarak yerli ve global vizyonu ile çalışmasını ve bu vizyonu gençlerimize kazandırmayı çok önemli görüyoruz. Gelişmiş ülkeler yazılım, sosyal medya ve bulut teknoloji şirketlerini global anlamda konumlarken uzaktan çalışmanın da etkisiyle özellikle bilgi teknolojileri alanındaki yetenekleri kendilerine çekiyorlar. Bu sebepledir ki gençlerimizin ve girişimcilerimizin meraklı, sorgulayan ve daha iyi eğitilmiş şekilde iş dünyamıza katılmasını ve yeni açılan iş alanlarında yer almalarını arzuluyoruz. Değerli konuklar, Türkiye olarak durmadan koşacak ve dünya ile rekabet edeceksek, aramızdaki mesafeyi dijital ve yüksek teknolojiyle kapatmak yegane seçeneğimiz. Biraz önce de bahsettiğim gibi dijital sektörlerin en büyük ve hatta tek kaynağı insan. Düşünen, üreten, öğrenmeyi öğrenmiş ve özgür bir insan. Dolayısıyla dijital dönüşümü iklim, enerji, insana yakışır iş ve toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliği başta olmak üzere daha sürdürülebilir bir dünya için zihniyet dönüşümünden, dijital yetkinliklerden bağımsız düşünemeyiz. AB 2030 dijital vizyonu, dijital pusula hedefleri doğrultusunda AB nüfusunun en az %80'inin temel dijital becerilere sahip olması, mevcut durumda 7,6 milyon olan bilgi teknolojileri alanında çalışan uzman sayısının ise 20 milyona çıkartılması öngörülüyor. Bu çerçevede nitelikli insan kaynağına ihtiyaç her geçen gün artıyor. Birazdan detaylarını dinleyeceğimiz raporda vurgulanan geri kalmış dijital becerilerin ekonomik sistemlerin dijitalleşmesinde ilerleme sağlamasını engelleyen temel bir kısıtlama olduğu analizi son derece çarpıcı. Geleceğin ekonomisinde ve rekabet ortamında ülkemizin daha güçlü olabilmesi için farklı yetkinlikler ve becerilerle donatılmış iş gücüne yatırım yapmamıza ihtiyaç var. Doğru adımları zamanla atabilirsek, insan kaynağımızın becerilerine odaklanırsak, ülkemizin yüksek katma değer yaratarak yoluna devam edeceğine inanıyoruz. TÜSİAD'ın 50. yıl kapsamında Geleceği İnşa Çağrısı başlıklı vizyon çalışmamızı yakın bir zaman önce kamuoyu ile paylaştık. Raporda da belirttiğimiz gibi refahın 3 temel unsuru olan insani gelişmeyi, bilimsel teknolojik ilerlemeyi ve güçlü kurumları inşa etmeyi ülkemizin kalkınması için önemli görüyoruz. Yine bu vizyon kapsamında gençlerin dijital yetkinlikler anlamında eğitimine direkt katkı sağlayan İşim Gücüm Geleceğim gibi projelere ciddi yatırım yapıyoruz. Sözlerime son verirken etkinlikte emeği geçenlere teşekkür ediyor. Sözü raporların detaylarını aktarması için kıymetli konuşmacılara bırakmak istiyorum. Herkese keyifli bir etkinlik dilerim.
Çok teşekkürler Serkan Bey. Öncelikle bir hatırlatmak istiyorum katılımcılarımıza. İngilizce ve Türkçe translation çeviri için interpretation butonundan seçim yapabilirler. Just to remind all the attendees, you may select the interpretation button for the Turkish or English. Now, let me invite Mr. Arvid Tuekner, who is our EBRD Managing Director of Turkey. Arvid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shule. I would like to thank everyone, first of all, for participating today and for giving us the opportunity to introduce the EBRD transition report to the Turkish business community. Very warm thanks, of course, go to our long-term partner, TÜSİAD, who is really traditionally already hosting our presentation of the report year after year. And I must say, I'm particularly happy that Serkan Sevim, TÜSİAD board member and leader of the Digital Turkey Roundtable, is hosting us today. I shall also mention that Serkan Bey has a very distinguished career in the world of technology, so we couldn't have a better host for today's event. Let me take a few minutes really only to touch upon EBRD strategy and operations in Turkey before I leave the floor to Beata Jaworczyk, EBRD's chief economist, for a much more detailed presentation of the transition report. EBRD has been supporting the transition of its economies towards more competitive, well-governed, green, inclusive, resilient, and integrated market economies through investments, business services, and policy reforms since 1991, and concretely in Turkey since 2009. The EBRD transition report, which focuses on a different theme every year, guide us in monitoring broader reform progress and discovering emerging trends and indicators in the EBRD region. This year's report is devoted to digitalization, as you already know, and it has been one of the major forces shaping developments across the world, and that has been much more accelerated by the effects of the pandemic. Digitalization is at the same time one of the three strategic priorities of EBRD alongside inclusion and green. Digitalization brings many opportunities, such as technological advancements, market reach, and productivity growth for our economies. Yet, workforce inclusion, skills transformation to adapt to changing job nature, job losses due to automation and infrastructure upgrades remain key policy challenges ahead of us. Furthermore, the uneven pace of digitalization across countries and even within countries increases the existing inequalities. The report points to large divides between EBRD regions and advanced economies, and also within countries in terms of digital infrastructure and digital skills amongst different gender, age, occupation, education, geography, and income groups. So the divides are really along several lines. According to the report, there have been significant improvements in digital infrastructure in most of the EBRD regions in the last 5 years, including in Turkey, which invested significantly in broadband infrastructure. However, insufficient regulatory frameworks and digital skills, combined with digital brain drain, are key constraints holding back digitalization in many EBRD economies. Berta will demonstrate all of that on the basis of detailed facts and figures. So a couple of words on EBRD operations in Turkey. Turkey is the largest country of operations for the bank, with more than 14 billion euro invested in 350 projects since 2009, mostly focused on the private sector, actually 95%. And also with a very strong policy engagement to develop financial markets, capital markets, transition to green and knowledge economy, as well as inclusion and gender equality. Fostering Turkey's knowledge economy through greater value chain integration, improved innovation ecosystems, and improved business standards is one of the strategic priorities of the bank in Turkey. And obviously, digitalization plays a key role in this journey. We are providing financial policy and technical support to assist Turkey's digital transformation while narrowing the digital divide across firms and individuals. And that can be done through financing of investments, technical cooperation, and also policy engagement. One of the recent examples is our joint work with the Ministry of Industry and Technology on the Hamle program, which should improve the innovation ecosystem. We appreciate the efforts of Turkey in developing the necessary infrastructure and regulatory framework for digital technologies. A recent example is also the adoption of an AI strategy, and other examples Serkan Bey just mentioned. So before leaving the floor to our Berta and her team, I would really like to thank her for the very much in-depth and multidimensional analysis of the digital divides we face and the policy implications which have been highlighted in the transition report. I hope that the findings of the report will contribute to the digitalization debate and agenda of Turkey. And I would like to re-emphasize our commitment to assist digital transformation of the country through investments and policy engagements. So we will have a Q&A session at the end, so I hope you will make good use of that. And with that, Shule, I think over to Berta.
Yeah. And now, thank you, Arvid. Now I'd like to invite Berta Jegorovic, who is our Chief Economist of EBRD, to make the presentation on EBRD Transition Report 2021-2022 with the title of System Upgrade, Delivering the Digital Dividend. Berta, floor is yours.
Thank you, Shula. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be joining you this afternoon to talk about report. Let me share with you my slides. Now, these days, wherever you turn, you hear about digitalization. Digitalization is a priority for international financial institutions, including the EBRD. It is a priority for the European Commission. It is a priority for most governments and for many firms. But what does it mean to promote digitalization? What is the state of play? What are the potential benefits and possible downsides of digitalizations? These are just few of the questions that our report aims to answer. So let me start with the state of play. In the report, we document large differences in terms of digitalization, both between countries as well as within countries. Now, how do we measure digitalization? Well, there is more than one way to do so. one way of thinking about digitalization is to look at adoption of fixed broadband internet that gives users fast internet access. And here we look at the number of subscriptions relative to the population size. And you see that within the region where we operate, there are huge differences. In Western Europe and in Northern Europe, the access to fast internet is almost universal. It's weaker in Southern Europe, and it's weaker yet in Eastern Europe, Turkey, Russia, and our other countries where we are active. But of course, countries of Africa, including North Africa, are yet further behind in this respect. Now, another way of measuring digitalization is to look at access to 4G mobile data. So here we are talking about fast data access on your phone. And this map depicts the number of years each location had access to 4G data. You see that in many places, no 4G data access is yet available. And you also see that in many countries, access is universal. Everyone in the country can access fast internet on their phone. But in some countries, there are only spots, mostly metropolitan areas, urban areas, where people can benefit from 4G access, while rural areas do not have the privilege of 4G data. You may say that here we are looking just at single dimensions of digitalization. So let me give you a comprehensive measure. Here is the index we developed for the purposes of the report. It is a combination, a compilation of 22 existing measures, which range from availability of infrastructure, digital skills, regulation, to outcomes such as e-government services, online shopping, online sales by firms. So when you combine these 22 measures into one index, several conclusions emerge. First, you see that there has been progress between 2015 and 2020 in terms of digitalization. This progress has happened both in advanced countries as well as in emerging markets. But what's quite striking is that the ranking of countries in terms of digital sophistication has remained very much the same, meaning that there hasn't been a lot of catch-up. If anything, countries which are doing better or which were doing better in 2015 in terms of digitalization continued to improve and continue to do well this day. Now, within emerging markets where the EBRD operates, there is quite a range of situations. At the one end of the spectrum, we have Estonia, which by many is considered the most digitalized economy in the world. It has the value of the index that exceeds that found in advanced economies. Other countries in the region, Lithuania, Slovenia, Czech Republic, are not far behind. Then there are a lot of countries such as Turkey, Serbia, Greece, which are in the middle of the pack. The level of digital sophistication is below what we see in advanced economies, but it is on par with other emerging markets or even better. And then we have countries such as Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. These are countries where digitalization has not progressed very much, where very little progress has been made in the last few years, and where the digital sophistication as measured by our index is below the level found in India, for instance. Another way you can look at digitalization is to ask, what is the proportion of people who shop online? In the United Kingdom, it's 90%. So pretty much shopping online is almost universal. Similar situation is found in Netherlands, Switzerland, or Germany. Online shopping is very popular. Now, you may ask, is it a good thing that people shop online, or is it a bad thing? We can debate that, but for the purposes of our report, online shopping is interesting because it reflects skills in the population. It reflects not just infrastructure, the availability of broadband or a fast phone internet access, it also reflects people's ability to engage in online shopping. So as I mentioned, in Western Europe, online shopping is widely spread. In Eastern Europe, the blue dots you see in the middle of the graph, it's still quite popular, but between half and 2/3 of the population shop online. Interestingly, Portugal and Italy are behind in that respect. They are behind Eastern Europe. Then you have Turkey and Western Balkans, where online shopping is much less popular. In Turkey, only about 1/3 of population has shopped online. And you might ask, why is it the case? We were quite intrigued by these large differences. So we used a survey to ask people why they are not interested or unable to make online purchases. And we were quite surprised by the answer. In Southern Europe, in Western Balkans, in Turkey, what prevents people from shopping online is the lack of skills. People talk about the lack of skills more frequently than about having concerns about payment security. And interestingly, payment security problems can be solved because in many emerging markets, you don't have to prepay for the goods you order. It's enough to pay on delivery. Now note that in this graph, we show prevalence of internet shopping in 2019 versus 2020. Most of the points lie above the 45-degree line, meaning that online shopping has become popular. But again, the ranking of countries has not changed very much. As I said, online shopping is a proxy for people's skills, so it's interesting to disaggregate the data even further and think about what prevents people from acquiring these skills. So when you graph the percentage of survey respondents who shop online against their income, you see very clearly that people who are better off are much more likely to shop online. Now, this is not surprising. You see this difference not only in emerging markets, the difference is also seen in advanced Europe, as depicted here by the gray line. But the difference in emerging markets is more pronounced. So it is not only a level effect, it's not only that at all levels of income, people in emerging Europe are less likely to shop online. It is also that the line is steeper. So the differences between poorer and richer households are more starker. The same picture emerges when you compare people living in cities to those living in the countryside. In both advanced and emerging Europe, city dwellers are more interested in online shopping, but the difference between them and those living in the countryside is smaller. Education seems to be probably the best, one of the two best predictors of ability or interest in online shopping. And here we are able to also include separately data for Western Balkans and Turkey. These data points are depicted in the slides in light blue color. And what you see is that as the level of education increases, people are much more likely to shop online. So for instance, in Western Balkans, about half of those with college education, with university education, shop online, but only a fifth of those with elementary education. Now, the differences are even more striking if you consider older people. So those between 55 and 74 years of age. 2/3 of them in advanced Europe shop online, as compared to only 15%, 1/5, in Western Balkans and Turkey. And if I were to further disaggregate this group, again, you would see differences between this older cohort by education. Older people who are more educated have much better digital skills than older people who have little education. Now, what do we take from all these graphs? Well, the first conclusion is that promoting digitalization is not only about building infrastructure. It's not only about fiber optic cable and telecom towers. It is also about skills. And there is a real danger that as digitalization progresses, some groups will be left behind because they will not have the skills that will equip them well for the demands of the labor market. And this is more likely to be the case in rural areas, among lower income groups and lower education groups. So when we talk about digitalization strategies, it's very important to focus on those disadvantaged groups to make sure that digitalization is not going to lead to big increases in inequalities. Now, let me move on to other aspects of digitalization, such as teleworking and artificial intelligence. Now, you may be asking, well, when are we going to see the effects of digitalization on the economy? The answer is we've already been seeing them, because digitalization has already led to big structural changes in many economies. And this is visible if you consider employment. So in this chart, we looked at the growth of employment in the last decade, and we split sectors into digitally intensive and sectors with low digital intensity. And in almost every country depicted here, you see that sectors with high digital intensity were growing much faster in terms of employment than the other industries. Moreover, in some countries, low digital sectors have seen zero employment growth or even decline. So they have been shrinking in terms of employment. And Turkey is no exception here. In Turkey, digitally intensive sectors have created employment twice as fast as other industries. So structural changes are already visible in the economy. Now, these structural changes, firms and individuals have been responding to these structural changes. And in particular, demand for education, for training, has been going up. And it's quite instructive to look at how frequently people have been attending digital training and what kind of training seems to be popular. So in this graph, we look at the share of individuals who took digital training, and we compare emerging markets where the EBRD operates to advanced economies. Now, if you look at training that is provided for free there is no difference between emerging Europe and industrialized countries, or sorry, emerging economies and industrialized countries. But once you consider paid training, big differences emerge. In particular, in emerging markets, people are much less likely to pay for training. They are less likely to attend training paid by employers. And that's probably the most striking difference you see in this graph. In advanced countries, employers are 3 times as likely to finance digital training than in emerging markets. There is also a big difference in on-the-job digital training. So training provided by employers for free. Again, there is more such training taking place in advanced economies. Now, there may be many reasons for that, but one possible reason may be due to employers in emerging markets being less willing to invest in workers because they are worried that the workers will emigrate and the employer will not benefit from their investment. And some of these worries may be warranted. And we see that clearly in the data provided by LinkedIn. You probably are familiar with LinkedIn, the job networking website. On LinkedIn, people describe their skills and people describe their jobs and where and the location of their jobs. So we use this information to trace people moving between countries, and we characterized individuals moving jobs across countries by type of skill they have. And not surprisingly, you see that advanced economies tend to import workers. And they tend to import workers with variety of skills, but in particular, people possessing disruptive technological skills seem to be quite in demand in advanced economies. Now, by disruptive tech skills, I mean skills related to artificial intelligence, to robotics, to nanotechnology, or to data science. Now, where have these people been coming from? Well, they've been coming from emerging markets and from Turkey as well. So even though people with various types of skills tend to move, people with business skills or specialized industry skills, this brain drain has been particularly large when it comes to technological skills and in particular disruptive technological skills. Now, another way you see this brain drain is if you compare employment structure to the structure of the educational system. So in this particular chart, we look at ICT professionals as share of employment. These are the blue bars. On top of that, we add ICT technicians as share of total employment. And then we compare that to ICT graduates as a share of all university or college graduates. Now, of course, you would expect that more people now obtain ICT degree than the share of those jobs in the economy. Well, that's not surprising because jobs encompass a lot of jobs are held by a lot of also older cohorts, people who got their education at the time when these skills were not in such a great demand. But what is particularly striking is the gap between the two. So if you consider advanced economies, there is not big difference between the share of graduates and the share of people holding ICT jobs in total employment. But in emerging markets where the EBRD operates, the gap is huge. And it's particularly huge in Western Balkans. So think about North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Albania. You see that these countries are educating a lot of people with digital skills, and they don't seem to be increasing or having a very large share of those people in their employment structure. In Turkey, actually, the gap is not so huge, but that's because ICT jobs account for a very small of total employment, and also ICT graduates account for a very small share of total graduates, way below of what is found in emerging markets as a whole. So for instance, in countries where EBRD operates, excuse me, on average, 4% of all graduates have ITC skills or have studied ICT related fields. In Turkey, that's half as much. It's only 2%. Now, let me move on to latest developments. As my colleague Arvid already mentioned, the pandemic has accelerated the process of digitalization. And one aspect of where we've seen this was movement from the office to home working. Essentially, while before the pandemic, employers were very hesitant to allow workers to work from home. They worried that workers would not be working hard. Workers were not that keen on working from home because they worried they would be passed over for promotions if they stayed home rather than staying in the office. Now that changed during the pandemic, where in many countries, people were forced by lockdowns to do home office, to work from their home office. It is quite interesting that emerging markets were able to make this adjustment to a similar extent as advanced economies. And actually, if you look at the percentage of respondents to our survey, which we conducted last August, and we asked people, how many days a week have you worked from home, if at all? We found that 60% of people, of respondents to that survey in Turkey, spent at least 1 day a week working from home. That's very similar to what you would find, for instance, in Netherlands or in Australia. So it's actually very similar to what you've seen in advanced economies. Now, if you zoom in on the data and ask who is working from home, you see that people located in urban areas and primarily young people were much more likely to work from home than older workers. You also see that people with higher levels of education, not surprisingly, were more likely to work from home than those with lower levels of education. Workers have enjoyed, to a large extent, working from home, and in particular, they believe that at home they are as productive as in the office, or even more productive than in the office. So in Turkey, 40% of people believe they are more productive working from home than working in the office. And that's very similar for the figure found in Germany, Australia, or the UK. Another 40% believes that they are about as productive at home as they are in the office. Only 20% feel that once they are at home, productivity goes down. And this share of people who feel their productivity decreases once they are at home is larger in emerging markets. Note that in China, there is a similar pattern, and that's often related to lack of reliable internet, to many disruptions that happen during the workday because of unreliable broadband infrastructure. Now, people seem to have enjoyed working from home so much that they want to continue to do so. Here you see the results of the survey we conducted last summer, where we asked people, how many days a week on average would you like to work from home once the pandemic is over? In Turkey, both men and women said that on average, they would like to work from home 2 days a week. Women are more keen than men. That's true in many countries, though not in every country. But then we ask people, how keen is your employer on working from home? Are they going to allow you to work from home? How many days a week do you think you will be able to do so? And you see this big discrepancy between what people would like to do and what they think their employer will allow them to do. Basically, workers are more enthusiastic about working from home than their employers are. And Turkey, again, is no exception here. And the discrepancy is on the order of 1 day a week. So most people would like to work from home 2 days a week, but they think that their employers will allow them to do so only 1 day a week on average. Now, what about the future? What will happen as digitalization continues to speed up? One big concern is exposure to AI automation. As artificial intelligence technology becomes more and more sophisticated, we can expect that many tasks currently performed by humans will be automated. And if you look at EBRD regions as a whole, they are not different in their exposure to AI automation than advanced economies. On average, 40% of jobs, both in emerging markets and in advanced economies, seem to be vulnerable to potential automation. Now, let me say a few words about how exposure to automation is assessed. There exist catalogs describing tasks associated with various types of occupations. And there is reasonably reliable information that allows us to assess what types of tasks lend themselves easily to automation. So based on that, you can calculate an index that tells you how vulnerable a job is to being automated. So the fact that there isn't such a big difference between emerging markets and advanced economies in terms of automation is not due to these two types of countries having the same job structure, but it is due to jobs in these two types of markets having the same type of exposure to automation. So even though these are markets with different occupational structure, even in emerging markets, vulnerability to AI could exist. Now, Turkey actually has shaded here in a very light color, which suggests that it is much less exposed to AI automation than most countries in our regions. Now, note that because job structures are also quite different within countries, there are big differences between large urban areas, mid-sized cities, and the countryside. AI automation is going to have different impacts within countries. And actually, it is likely to hit urban areas more than countryside. So what does it all mean? What we've already seen is digitalization leading to big structural changes in economies, as depicted by employment in our report, and more is to come due to AI automation. And the second conclusion emerging from this analysis is that working from home is here to stay. Most workers and most employers will continue with part-time working from home. And that's going to matter beyond the lives of workers. It's going to matter for businesses that provide services to office workers in city centers. If suddenly office workers will be in the office only 3 days instead of 5 days a week, there will be less business for restaurants, for coffee shops, and perhaps for shops in that area. Now, if people don't have to commute to work every day, then they may choose to live outside of cities. And surveys from both advanced countries and emerging markets show that people right now are much more interested in investing in housing, in buying a house, in building a house. And there may be more interest in living outside of cities because working from home allows for a longer commute if this commute does not have to happen every day. And that again has implications for cities because it will change the structure of cities. There may be more people living on the outskirts. It also will have implication for transport infrastructure because we will need more ways for people to get from outside of city into the city center. Finally, working from home will boost the ability of skilled workers in emerging markets to export their services. A firm in London or Munich now does not have to limit itself to workers in London or Munich, or even workers in the UK or Germany. It actually could hire people located in different countries. And differentials in wages of skilled people remain quite substantial between countries. So it is an opportunity for emerging markets to export more services. Now, let me now say a few words about how improvements in digital infrastructure benefit firms. Now, there are many ways in which it may happen. Let me just focus on two. Access to fast internet lowers the cost of obtaining information about potential buyers in other parts of the same country as well as abroad. Access to fast internet allows firms to make sales online. Now, this is particularly important for small firms and for services firms. Now, large firms can easily invest in buying information about foreign markets because they operate at a large scale. So this cost, this fixed cost of obtaining information about foreign markets is spread over a large volume of sales. This is not the option for SMEs. So you would expect that better infrastructure will be more beneficial to small firms than to large firms. This is indeed the case. Now, in the report, we did a case study of Turkey. We looked at rollout of fiber optic cable in Turkey. That rollout happened at different times in different parts of Turkey. And here you see the map where we depict the share of fiber optic cable where we depict the length of the fiber optic cable relative to the size of the province. And you see big geographical differences. We use these geographic differences to look at how firms reacted, how firms were affected by access to fast internet. And what you see is actually quite intuitive. You see that large firms, depicted here with orange bars, that small firms, small manufacturing firms, depicted here with orange bars, were more likely to increase exports, numbers of exported products, or number of product destination combinations. So essentially, access to fast internet allowed firms to reach foreign markets to sell more products. But that was true only for small manufacturing firms, as you would expect, because large firms could have obtained that information anyway. They were able to afford that information, to buy that information anyway. Now, another case study we conducted was to look at Russia. So here you see in the left-hand side, you see the region of Moscow, and some of those points marked here, these are towers, these are telecom towers, which relay 4G signal. So for Russia, we had very detailed information on where these towers were located and where the 4G signal was available. So we were able to consider firms that were in the same neighborhood, sometimes even on the same street. And the only difference between them being that some firms were close enough to the tower to benefit from the 4G signal, and some firms were not. And we use that methodology to ask whether firms that had access to 4G signal behave differently. And the results are quite striking. We see that micro and small services firms that had access to 4G signal increased their employment faster relative to similar firms without such access. And the difference in employment growth was about 20%. And it is both micro and small firms, so those with fewer than 50 employees, as well as really micro firms, those with 9 employees initially. Moreover, you see that in services, access to fast mobile data was encouraging firms to introduce new products and services. So what does it mean? It means that infrastructure matters. Digital infrastructure allows the cost of obtaining information, and in this way helps SMEs to reach new markets. But of course, we need to remember that as firms are able to sell to other parts of their country or abroad, access to internet may also invite more competition from firms located elsewhere. Now, in the final part of the report, we look specifically at fintech and at the banking sector. As you probably know, China is a leader in fintech, in financial technology. In this chart, we depict the average share or the average volume of alternative funding sources as a percentage of GDP. And the blue bars pertain to peer-to-peer lending. Now, in China, peer-to-peer lending amounts for more than 1% of GDP. United Kingdom and the US are also quite advanced in the respect, though certainly nowhere near the level found in China. Interestingly, some emerging markets, such as Estonia, Georgia, Armenia, are also quite advanced in that respect, and they are among global leaders when it comes to peer-to-peer funding. In Turkey, the size of the fintech sector relative to GDP is so small that it's actually not visible on this graph. So fintech is one area where Turkey is not at the forefront of changes. Now, not surprisingly, you see that there is a strong relationship between the level of income, as measured here by GDP per capita, and the amount of alternative finance available per capita. Turkey here is below the regression line, which means that fintech in Turkey is less developed than what you would expect given the Turkish level of income. Now, the countries that are particularly worth looking at are the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. They are among the leaders when it comes to fintech, and there are several reasons for that. Now, of course, they have the basics, they have the infrastructure, and they have the skills. But they also have entrepreneurial spirit. They have this culture of entrepreneurship, and they top the charts in terms of that. They also have governments that are very supportive of digitalization and of fintech in particular. So when new types of services are created, they get very fast feedback from the regulators. And you can think of those Baltic countries, these small states, as being regulatory sandboxes where innovative firms test their ideas, test their services before going on to the larger European market. Of course, being part of the European Union means that these firms automatically can provide their services in other parts of Europe. Now, what prompts development of fintech sector? The pattern you see in the data is quite striking. Fintech is large in countries where the traditional financial sector is well developed. So think about UK, United States, China. But it's also quite large in countries with underdeveloped financial sector. So Armenia, Georgia, Moldova. So in those countries, fintech becomes almost a substitute for traditional financial services firms. Now, I promise, now what's also visible in the data is that in many countries, in many emerging markets, fintech development is skewed towards debt financing rather than equity financing. It is true in most countries, or if not in all countries where the EBRD operates, that firms are much more likely to rely on debt financing than on equity financing. And fintech is further promoting this preference towards debt at the expense of equity. So most fintech investment in the EBRD regions is targeting debt rather than equity. Now, let me say a few words about the traditional banking sector. Every 4 years, we conduct a survey of bank chief executives. And one of the questions we ask is about their key strategic concerns. And what you see here is that half of CEOs think about automation and robotization as the most profound trend that will be shaping their bank's activities in the future. And there are many ways in which it's going to manifest itself. It could be credit scoring, it could be automating many banking processes, including customer service, including processing of loans. But also, this is likely to lead to closure of bank branches. We asked banks whether they expect to shrink their network of branches, whether they expect to increase it or to remain about the same. In Central Europe and Baltic states, remember Baltic states where fintech is very developed, almost 3/4 of banks expect to shrink their share, their number of branches they have. This is true in Southeastern Europe. This is also true in Southeast Mediterranean and Turkey. Though it is true to a much lesser extent in Southeast Mediterranean and Turkey, some banks, about 1/3 of banks, are considering shrinking their number of their branches. But then there are also quite a few banks which are on the rise, which expect to increase the number of branches. So in that sense, this region is different from other regions. Now, in Central Asia, where I think the banking network is less developed, if anything, banks will continue to invest in branches. So let me close this presentation with some conclusions. I used many indicators to demonstrate the large differences that exist both across and within countries in terms of digital infrastructure and digital skills. So promoting digitalization means not only building infrastructure, but also investing in skills. And it is particularly important to invest in skills of people, of groups who lag behind in that respect, because accelerating digitalization is likely to bring inequalities. Without helping disadvantaged groups improve their digital skills, we really risk digitalization leading to big increases in inequality. I also talked about significant digital brain drain from the EBRD regions, including Turkey. I've also tried to convince you that digitalization has already led to structural changes in economies, and that it also has already helped SMEs access new markets because it lowered the cost of obtaining information. Now, more changes are to come, driven by exposure to AI automation, though Turkey seems at the moment to be more sheltered from that. Fintech is a very interesting new development. Fintech seems to be booming in sectors with well-developed financial markets as well as in underdeveloped financial markets, but not yet very much in Turkey. So let me stop here and just mention that there is much more in the report than what I've presented you. Many people, including some Turkish colleagues, have contributed to this report, so I would encourage you to find it online and read it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Beata, for this presentation. Now I would like to invite the attendees for their questions to Arvid and Beata. You may use the chat function in order to convey your questions, and I'll be reading them from here. But maybe in the meanwhile, while we are waiting, I can already raise one question to Beata. And Beata, the report says that the pandemic has accelerated the process of digitalization. Is this likely to support developing and emerging countries in catching up to advanced economies?
Thank you very much for this question, Shule. So you may remember that I showed big differences across our countries, and in particular, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, West Bank, Gaza, Egypt were had quite lower values of this digitalization index. In those countries, for instance, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, if you ask people whether they shop online, fewer than 10% of people will give you an affirmative answer. But even in those countries, our surveys show that small and medium-sized enterprises have been moving their sales online during the pandemic. Because whenever there were lockdowns, whenever people were unable to move and shop, firms were looking for alternative ways of providing goods and services. Now, this may have very interesting implications, because while skills are one of the issues preventing people from online shopping, this distrust or lack of trust is another one. This rapid rise in online purchases may help firms build up reputation as trustworthy providers, and they will be able to benefit from that reputation long after COVID will be gone. But the implication is that this increase in digitalization is likely to benefit firms which are already good, firms which are productive, firms which are flexible, firms that have good managers who engage in strategic thinking. So just like with any changes, digitalization will benefit better performers and may be detrimental for weaker firms.
Okay, thank you. One more question actually from my side, because this probably comes to the mind of everyone. You know that nowadays we talk a lot about the gender gap and how to decrease the disparity between the gender and provide gender equality. So the fast-moving changes seen in the frontier between the activities performed by humans and activities performed by machines have been transferring the world of work. So the impact of automation is likely to be different for men and women. How do you see the automation impact on the gender pay gap?
So the research we have done, and in particular research that was done by my colleague, Cevat Aksoy, shows that automation is likely to increase gender wage gap. But that is due to the structure of employment, to occupational structure of employment by men and women. It seems that often jobs that are more vulnerable to automation tend to be more popular among women. But there is also a broader angle of digitalization and gender. Now, this recession caused by COVID has been quite unique because it is the only recession in the post-war time in advanced economies where women were more likely to lose jobs than men. And that was due to women being more represented in services sector, such as hospitality, restaurants, other services than men. However, the recession also had an impact on skilled women working from home. Surveys of time use show clearly that during lockdowns, during the pandemic, women were responsible for a much larger share of additional duties, such as taking care of sick relatives or homeschooling children than men worked. And that meant that in many households, men's careers got prioritized. And that may have been a rational decision, because if the husband makes more money than the wife, it may be rational to prioritize the husband's career. But because we have a glass ceiling and gender wage gap, that means that we may be perpetuating these gender inequalities. Data from job websites show that women, skilled women, have not been applying for jobs during the pandemic. They haven't been updating resumes. They have been taking a step back. So there is a danger that the pandemic will have disadvantaged not just lesser skilled women, but also highly skilled women. Finally, if you remember my chart on interest in working from home, women are more keen on working from home in many countries. And that may mean that if they choose to do that, they may be less seen in the office. They may have fewer opportunities to network. And again, their career progression may be slower than the progression of men.
Okay, thank you. And maybe this would be also very interesting for Turkey. One more question from this point of view. What is the likely impact of increased digitalization on informal economy? Is it likely to result in more firms moving to formal sector, or if so, will this support transition in the EBRD's economies?
Well, you probably have a better idea than I do, but I would think that if digitalization lowers the cost of online sales and allows firms to reach more customers, and in particular, reach customers further away, it will give an incentive for firms to become formal, right? Because firms that are informal have to stay under the radar screen of tax authorities. They typically don't want to advertise how much business they do. They want to hide from authorities. But if you are selling online, you actually want to advertise how much business you do, how reliable you are as a provider of service or goods. So you would benefit from advertising that information, but that should give you an incentive to become a formal firm.
Okay, thank you very much, Beata. Arvid, I don't know whether you would like to make some closing remarks.
Well, I really would like to thank Beata for that quite detailed presentation, and many insights in Turkey, which really resonate with some of the experience we have from our discussions. So that's very, very helpful.
I'm sorry, but just I realized one question coming, and if you allow me, I'll read this one and then we close the session. How do you see the benefit of digitalization in terms of electricity and grid systems? The question is raised.
I think everybody is talking about smart infrastructure and smart cities. So digitalization certainly gives an opportunity to optimize services of infrastructure. And in particular, we need to do better when it comes to the grid, when it comes to connectivity, if we want to take greater advantage of renewables. Because obviously wind and sunshine don't always produce energy in the same location, so we need to be transporting energy. But of course, we need to remember that greater digitalization exposes firms to risks of cyber attacks, right? We also have to remember that there is a large concentration, for instance, among providers of cloud services. And if key providers of infrastructure use the same cloud services providers, we may be creating systemic risk. So I think, the digitalization offers lots of benefits, but it carries risks that we need to invest in mitigating.
Okay, thank you very much, Beata, for the presentation. And I'd like to thank very much to TÜSİAD for hosting us. And Nurşen, I think we can close the session here. Thanks for your hosting, and have a good evening to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
We thank you for this
Bye-bye.
excellent presentation and for congratulations for the report. Thank you so much.